Hello, everyone. My name is Sylvia Svejanova, and I'm Vice President of Research at IFSAM. It is my distinct pleasure and privilege to welcome everyone to this panel and to our distinguished panel members. I would like to welcome Dr. Jean-Emmanuel Faure, Team Leader in the Unit of Open Science and Research Assessment at the Directorate General for Research and Innovation of the European Commission in Belgium. Warm welcome to you, Dr. Faure. Andrew Jack, Global Education Editor, Financial Times, UK, who has participated at IFSAM's webinars for quite some time, so a veteran of sorts in that discussion genre. Warm welcome to you also, Andrew. Professor Erika Salvay, Vice President of the Ibero-American Academy of Management, Professor and Director of Research at the Universidad del Desarrollo, Chile, and also visiting professor at the Business School of Universidad de San Andrés, Argentina. We're welcome to you also, Professor Salvay. And last but not least, Professor Tang Zhen, who is professor at the Business School of Hohai University in China and leader of funded projects of research. I'm also very happy to introduce to you Dr. Pedro Monteiro, a colleague of mine at the Copenhagen Business School, who will be a co-chair of this panel. And I will give you, Pedro, briefly the words to say a few words to the audience.
Hi, everyone. Welcome from my side as well. I just want to say that during the Q&A, you all will be having the opportunity to actually write some of your questions. So while the different panelists are talking, just hold on to your question, think what you'd like to ask them. And during the Q&A, you have the opportunity to write it and they're going to address that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Pedro. And this is to encourage you. We would love to hear the audience voices. So you are warmly welcome to post questions, comments, quibbles, or any other form of intervention in this discussion, which is for you and for us all. We will be together for almost 90 minutes. So before we start with the questions to our distinguished panelists, I would like to invite them to tell us a few words about who they are and how what they do in their daily work and life actually relates to the topic of this panel, which is reconsidering research assessment in times of impact. And I would like to first give the floor to Dr. Jean-Emmanuel Faure.
Thank you. Thank you first for inviting me to this panel, and good afternoon or morning to everyone online. I'm indeed working in the European Commission. I've been working in this institution over the last 20 years, being in charge of different files, notably the development of certain research infrastructures in the life sciences, also the Innovative Medicines Initiative, but more recently working on open science and more specifically on research assessments. And I thought that I could take the opportunity of introducing myself by highlighting what I mean in today's discussion by research assessment, and also why we need some changes, why we need some reform. This is, I think, what I would like to give as an introduction. So research assessment, in all the points I will make in this session, is to be understood as both the assessment of research projects, typically by funding agencies, but also the assessment of researchers at different levels in their careers, both as recruitment or during promotions. And this is typically done by universities, by research centers, etc. And also the assessment of research institutions. For example, assessment of universities for the allocation of funds in their country. So a broad definition, basically, of research assessments. We need some reforms, and we are working in the Commission since, in particular, the end of 2020 on reforming research assessment. I would like to explain why we think this is really something important to develop. First, because we think that the evolution of the research process requires that the way research assessment is carried out evolves, is reformed. Research is becoming more digital. it's not only publications that are produced, but it's also data sets, softwares, algorithms, and this needs to be recognized. It's more and more iterative. It, of course, since decades, it builds on previous research results, but now it builds on data and on digital objects, and the importance of reproducibility becomes more and more important. And also we see an evolution towards more collaboration and more openness. And I think the pandemic has demonstrated the importance of being open and collaborative to be able to deliver quickly solutions for society. So the importance of open science practices and also team science is growing. A second big reason for an evolution is that there is also an increasing demand on research as concerns societal, environmental, economic challenges. And also the research outputs are more diverse. It's not just about research publications. It's also contributing to the policy making. Again, we have seen this during the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. It's contributing to education, to knowledge transfer, to leadership, etc. A third point I would like to make in this preliminary introduction is we need also to move away from some inappropriate practices, some inappropriate uses of journal and publication-based metrics. Indeed, the current culture, at least in Europe, is very much focused on rewarding the quantity of publications and their venue, where they are published. It doesn't reward much the sharing, the collaboration, and outputs that are other than publications. And after all this changing research assessment is for supporting improved, better quality and more impactful research, and also rendering the research system more attractive, in particular for the young researchers, for the new generation. And we think it requires a system and cultural change because the ways of assessing, of proceeding today are very much ingrained in the current practices. And I will just finish this introduction by mentioning that there has been several initiatives you have heard of: the Leiden Manifesto, the Hong Kong Principles, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, DORA. These are mainly declarations. DORA is very important. It makes in particular the recommendation to not use journal-based metrics like the journal impact factors as a surrogate measure of the quality of individual research papers. However, adhering to this declaration doesn't commit the organizations to act on them. And we therefore think that there is a need for pushing this forward and having institutions, research institutions, effectively committing and acting on changes. And a good example, a recent example that dates 2019 is with the Netherlands, where the universities and research funding organizations came together to rediscuss the evaluation criteria and processes and what they consider should be valued in research. And we are currently developing a European initiative in a similar manner, inspired by this example of the Netherlands. I will stop here. There will be, I guess, some time to present in more detail this initiative.
Thank you very much for this introduction, both to your own journey as well as to the wealth of initiatives the European Commission is leading in the recent months, one could say, and years. And I would like to move now to Andrew Jack, who represents Financial Times, but also one way of approaching this measurement through rankings. And to give you a warm welcome, Andrew, and to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and your general take or connection with this topic of research assessment. Welcome.
Thanks very much. Very good to be part of this discussion, and look forward to questions and discussion. So my name is Andrew Jack at the Financial Times. As you'll know, amongst other things, we do some rankings of business schools, of which a significant element, about 10%, is taken up by our assessment of research output from institutions. And we've been very actively engaged, including through IFSAM and other organizations and individual faculties with thinking about how we can refresh, update, make as relevant as possible this process. I'd stress that, not all that I do or the FT does is around rankings. There's a much wider range of issues that we cover, including in our direct, if you like, qualitative reporting. I've been very keen and have commissioned many articles written by business school academics over the past few years. So they express their research and ideas in their own words, for example, and then engaged in lots of wider public discussions, thinking in as far as we're going to use metrics, what should they be and how should they be used. I particularly welcome initiatives such as those by the Responsible Research in Business and Management Network, which has been thinking a lot about societal impact of research. Certainly in my mind, the fundamental principle is that research should actually ultimately be about impact, and perhaps nowhere more than the sorts of research that's being done, the focus, the expertise of business and management schools. We have to be careful about putting the cart before the horse and trying to dictate research areas in advance. And equally, of course, it's not the role of academic researchers to be simply delivering consulting style research, if you like, that can be directly and obviously applied. There's clearly a role for serendipity, there's a role for theoretical and methodological work. There are many things of which the ultimate impact you can't predict or know even when you begin that work. And so I think clearly one doesn't want to limit or restrict or exclude those sorts of, if you like, higher level intellectual projects. But I do think there could be a lot more done to think and focus and strategize in the development and conceptualization of research, and then thinking through where there is some, as one hopes often, societal relevance, the chain of implementation and dissemination, if you like. So to me, academic research should not focus primarily or see its ultimate objective as being a publication in a peer-reviewed journal. It should be some degree of rigorous peer-reviewed assessment to ensure that there is credible, original, rigorous analysis. But then there should be a flow through wider public engagement, dissemination, debate, and hopefully uptake of ideas that are as valuable as possible. And I think some of those things are therefore areas that we're very interested in trying to reflect, both in our reporting and in our rankings. And as part of that, I'm very interested and open to ideas around ways to most meaningfully measure it. But I think alongside research output as publication, I think we really have to recall that some of the most fundamental impacts that academics can have are on their students, and therefore the interaction of research with teaching is fundamental. And then also the wider influence of academics with their fellow faculty, with their host institutions, with their communities, with their peers elsewhere, and how that can influence ways of working, collaborative projects, engagement with those within and beyond academia, the operations of business schools and higher education institutions more widely. I think all of that should be part of the mix. And therefore, I agree with Jean-Emmanuel as well that there certainly shouldn't be a monopolistic focus on research metrics as the be all and end all. And I think the focus of that needs to begin with faculty leadership and ensuring that in their hiring, promotion, tenure decisions, research funding, other forms of decisions, that they're trying to take a holistic view so that they will reflect a range of the different academic skill sets, from, as it were, the purely intellectual academic research players through to very powerful teachers, through to those who are very active in the world of practice and so on. And it seems to me that wider holistic approach with a focus on societal impact is fundamental.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And it can't be a more appropriate place to introduce our two other panelists who are actually out there in the field leading faculty and leading research projects. And I want to give the floor to Professor Erika Salvai to introduce herself. Welcome, Erika.
Thank you, Sylvia. Okay, well, my name is Erika Salvai. I am a professor and researcher in strategy. Basically, the topics in which I am interested are implementation of the strategy, strategic process. I am also very interested in international business, especially focused on emerging markets and Latin America, of course. And in the last years, I also get involved into diversity, right, at the corporate level. So I would say that this is where I am. I have my research, most of my research. But on top of that, I have to say, to confess that I am working in a business school, right? So, in this business school in particular, I am the research director. And before that, I was the academic director of executive education. And I agree with Andrew that we need a more holistic vision, at least in terms of assessment. Right now, we are pushed to publish in top journals. But the scholars at the business school have been doing for a long time a lot of things with impact. We have impact each time that we go to our classrooms. We discuss many of our intuitions that we want to explore in research with our students, with our MBA students, with our PhD students. We write cases of companies that then we teach in the class, but nobody basically valued this type of outputs. So as Jan and Andrew said before, I completely agree that we need to think about rewards, about this impact that we already have, and nobody is considering or measuring so far. I also have to say that as a university, we have more and more concern about how we as researchers help on solving the grand challenges that we are facing, right? At the social level, at the environmental level. Basically, for now, we are creating an initiative on sustainability. But just to close, I think that here in Chile, at least, we are not, we don't have a conversation at the national level so far. I think that we have universities that are trying to move to consider more the issue of impact, but we don't have so far a situation like the Netherlands, like Jean-Manuel mentioned. But then I can give more details on what we are doing at the university in terms of impact. So now I think that Tang can continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Erika. And I also want to warmly welcome Professor Tang Zhen. And this is very much in the spirit of IFSAM to open up the conversation to the many diversities of academia and the many contexts, not only Europe, but Asia, Latin America, Africa, in different ways approaching this impact agenda and from different national contexts. So it is with great pleasure that I welcome you, Professor Tang Zhen, and if you can say a few words about who you are as a scholar, but also how your work relates to these issues of research assessment, leadership of projects, and impact overall. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. My name is Chang Zhen, a professor in the Department of Management and Human Resource Management at Hauhai University Business School. My research direction and courses I teach are strategic management. I also serve as the Associate Dean of the Business School of Hauhai University, in charge of academic research. And another area of my responsibilities is alumni management and cooperative development. This work is mainly to connect the academic research of our school with the needs of external alumni enterprises or industry enterprises. Hauhai University is a comprehensive university focused on water conservancy engineering. Since it's established in 1915, it has been committed to serve the water conservancy engineering cause in China. Therefore, Hauhai University and our business school attaches great importance to the connection with the real needs of the industry and the society, including our country, state. Therefore, in terms of academic research, whether it is academic publication or funded projects, the research questions and service objectives of our school are very focused on responding to national strategic needs and industrial needs and social needs. So I do research on strategic management. In addition to publications, I also go to companies to do consulting and apply for national fund projects. My last national funding was to study how the technical standards of Chinese large hydropower engineering enterprises can go to the international stage. I use content from academic research and experience in consulting to my classroom teaching. In my own opinion, first-class management research should reflect the positive practical significance. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Tang Zhen. So now we know the panelists at least a little bit. And I just, before we dive into specific questions to each of you, given your roles and your areas of expertise, let me just say a few words about IFSAM's agenda in this space. And as you may know, a few years ago, around 2000, actually in response to Financial Times' invitation to reconsider the ranking system, there was an effort initiated at IFSAM to rethink what we mean and how we conceive good research and what it means to have quality research. As a result of a series of webinars with different stakeholders, the soft policy on research of the General Assembly came to fruition last summer. It has been over a year now. And in this soft policy statement, what the different learned associations of IFSAM express is some principles which we as a collective think should be valued. These principles have to do with collaborative research, what was already mentioned by a number of you in your opening commentaries. This need for appreciation of both contribution to knowledge, but also different forms and ways of contributing to practice and policy making. And also a special interest, which we have tried to reflect in this panel, to capture the diversities, to go beyond what is conceived as a mainstream business school that delivers on particular ways of research or research metrics, and to reach out to universities, to ways of doing, to researchers across the globe. And I think our purpose with this panel is to open this field for further discussion and actually update the ideas in this policy statement with these new initiatives that have been taking place recently. And I will start, given that we finished on our leaders of academic research at the level of faculty and universities, I will go back again to the bigger picture, and we'll go back to Jean-Emmanuel Faure. And in 2021, the European Commission initiated a very wide co-creation effort. You literally invited different stakeholders to join you in this effort you mentioned to reform research assessment. And we would love to hear a little bit about the process, but also what this wide participation or consultation led to in terms of this agreement, which was finalized this summer. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, I will indeed provide you with some details about the process and the outcome. So indeed, we have carried out quite broad consultation throughout 2021 through bilateral meetings with 30 organizations. And we really consulted a broad set of research organizations, research funders, universities, research centers, associations of these organizations, but also national evaluation agencies, and also, very importantly, associations of researchers and academies, learned societies. We have, as you said, published a report end of 2021. And in this report, so after these numerous dialogues, and also on top of that, we had large assembly meetings with over 150 people each, we published a report in which we have indicated what should be, according to these discussions and consultation, the objectives for reforming research assessments and the principles that should guide reform in the assessment of, again, as I said earlier, assessment of research, researchers, and research institutions. And also in this report, we indicated something we discussed with stakeholders, a way forward, a possible way forward to advance research assessments. We think that the way forward is to bring together in a discussion all the organizations that are involved with research assessment. I already listed the different types. I would like to do this again because I think it's really important to have a good understanding of the broadness of the stakeholders involved. So universities, research centers, research infrastructures, so all those performing research, but also research funders, and we think about public funders, but also private funders. National and regional authorities that are involved in assessment, because in some countries, the assessment of institutions or research units is carried out by dedicated agencies or sometimes branches of certain ministries. Very important to bring in those that are assessed or representative of those that are assessed, the researchers and their learned societies, their academies, but also some other relevant organizations. I'm thinking about organizations like DORA, like also normative organizations like INORMS and others. And the idea that developed during our consultation is to bring these organizations together through an agreement, but an agreement that is not an additional, a new declaration of intent, but an agreement that has a list of commitments for actions, that commits the signatories for action, and also with an agreed time frame. And based on this agreement, to build a coalition of signatories that can work together, collaborate, exchange information, knowledge, pilot new approaches, and progressively over the years to come, improve the practice of research assessment. So this is what came out of the consultation. And we think that this coalition approach would be a way to help the signatories of an agreement to reach their commitments, and this would enable reforms. So after the publication of this consultation report, we launched a call for expression of interest to understand, to map the organizations that would be interested to participate, contribute. And we received over 350 expressions of interest from 40 different countries, and representing all the types of organizations I mentioned already 2 times, so I will not repeat a 3rd time. So this shows a quite strong momentum that led, after several months of work, so during the month of January through July, we as European Commission facilitated the work of stakeholders with notably the help of two specific organizations that are Science Europe, the organization that groups the main European research funders, and the European University Association that groups over 800 universities in Europe. So we co-designed an agreement that was published in July, on 20th July. The approach, and I think it's very important to notice, is also very much supported by the EU member states policymakers. I don't know how familiar you are with policymaking in Europe, but there are conclusions from the EU Council from June 10th that back and support the approach of forming a coalition to reform research assessments. And in the European research area policy agenda for the years to come, one action is there to indeed facilitate and support reform to research assessment. So I think I should stop here with the process and focus on the content and say a few words. I will be short, hopefully. First, in terms of content, I'd like to give some indications about first the vision of this agreement. So the vision developed in this agreement is that assessment of researchers and research institutions needs to support the quality and impact of research, and how by recognizing the diverse outputs, the diverse practices, and the diverse activities that maximize the quality of research and the resulting impacts. And I think diversity is something that was mentioned several times already by Andrew, by Erika in particular. We see this as a very important component in this vision. And this requires basing assessment primarily on qualitative judgment that is supported by more responsible use of quantitative indicators. Now, to give a little bit more specifics about what is in this agreement, so I detailed the vision, now what is in the agreement. The agreement consists of first 10 principles to guide reforms. And as I said, commitments, 10 commitments for change, including a time frame, so commitment to act in the few coming years. And also it details how a coalition could be established and could work and operate. And I think it's very important here that I detail 4 of these 10 commitments that we consider as core commitments. The first one is to recognize the diversity of the contributions to and also the careers in research according to the different needs and the nature of the research in the various institutions. So this is the first core commitment by the signatories. A second is to base research assessment primarily on qualitative evaluation, for which peer review is central, and this being supported by responsible use of quantitative indicators. A third commitment, which is even more practical, is to abandon the inappropriate uses in research assessment of journal and publication-based metrics, such as, for example, some inappropriate uses of the journal impact factor or the H-index. And the last commitment we consider core, we consider important, is to avoid the use of international rankings of research organizations in research assessment. So I'm very careful here. It's the use of international rankings of research organizations for the purpose of research assessments, because we think that many such rankings are based on inappropriate metrics that risk to trickle down to research assessments. And there are additional commitments I will not detail, but that are more supportive. So committing to sharing knowledge, committing to dedicating resources to changes, committing to mutual learning, committing to reforming the criteria, tools and processes, etc. So supporting commitments. Very last point I like to mention. So the agreement is there. It was published. It is now up for signature. So all organizations that are ready to commit to this can sign and would join then the coalition. The coalition is to be viewed as a place where to work together and develop solutions. And this coalition is expected to welcome organizations not only from Europe, but from any country, provided that there is commitment and interest. That's it for this.
Thank you so much for introducing these efforts to bring a larger base of support around this agenda and this reform. I will now move to Andrew, and you have also opened up for collaboration and have been running slow hackathons and other initiatives through which you have invited others in your own processes and in your own thinking. We would love to hear a bit more of how the Financial Times is reforming your own kind of approach to assessing impact. And you did mention a wealth of other initiatives, of course, beyond the rankings, but probably share with us some of these new approaches you have been working on in the recent months. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. So it's very much a work in progress. We've been having a lot of these sorts of public or semi-public discussions with different specialists. We've tried to talk to academics, to funders, to users, implementers, practitioners, and so on, and also data providers and analyzers, if you like. I have to say, we haven't yet found a magic answer. I think I would agree with what John Emmanuel was just saying about the limitations of a lot of the. I wouldn't count incidentally our rankings in quite the same way as the big international explicit research rankings. But I think all of the concerns expressed by DORA and other bodies around the dangers of focusing simply on bibliometrics narrowly defined are dangerous. What I'm very interested in, I suppose, are two things. One is to encourage, if you like, an open data infrastructure, which would allow to move away from proprietary systems that are very difficult to use. And I would include in that, incidentally, things like Google Scholar, which have value but are very difficult to get beneath the surface. I personally think that certain standards like ORCID for individual scholar identification, RAW for institutions, DOIs, which I would like to see, as it were, democratized to cover books and chapters in books, and then equivalent registration systems for other forms of academic output in a, as I say, open source way would be incredibly helpful, so that whoever is engaged in collection analysis has the widest range of tools and data sources possible. I also think, and I was having a discussion only yesterday with someone about this issue, that the more we can harmonize to provide the most efficient sort of resource light way to collect these different sorts of data sets, the better. And so I mean, obviously IFSAM is one great forum, and I would love to hear from other ideas about, because I think there's often perhaps a disconnect also between the officials within institutions who do the collection for all the different rankings, and then perhaps the intellectual or academic leadership around research. And I think there needs to be perhaps a forum to bring together those different groups and to say, these are the sorts of things that would be useful. We all need certain sets of data and indicators to track. It's only part of the solution, but let's make what we do in this space as useful and compatible to all sorts of different groups as possible. So at the, if you like, the infrastructure level, I think that's a very important area to reflect on. Then, as I say, in terms of measuring impact, I think certainly in terms of my discussion so far, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to go to, in any meaningful timescale or in any consensual way, a sort of final impact in terms of outcome in the world of practice of research. It's too complex in terms of timescales, transparency, shared responsibility, willingness of the all those in that chain from idea to action to combine and coordinate. But what I do think we could do is start to shift the light a little bit from the pure peer-reviewed academic journal to those next stages, the efforts to disseminate ideas and intellectual production, as I say, beyond academia, looking at where it's being picked up by disseminators, by others in the field or beyond the field. And then I think this will always have to be supplemented by the qualitative, the human input and assessment. You know, when I've talked to academic leaderships who say, you know, we don't look ultimately when we make a decision on tenure, for example, at the metrics at all. We actually go and read the papers, you know, and when you've got leading experts actually reading and looking at the articles themselves, that provides a far more insightful measure of the real intellectual contribution of an author than any distilled high-level, necessarily simplistic metric or combination of metrics across a bunch of different papers. So I think there are always going to be limits to the quantitative, and that's why I've been very keen to encourage, and we've launched a series of awards around academic research with societal impact, including some work with IFSAM on this, which I think is very important, because ultimately, you know, it's like the wider debate about ESG and looking at what companies are or aren't doing. You know, ESG is so vast, there are so many standards, there are so many different aspects to it. You can't necessarily expect any one organization to perform or get top marks in everything. And there's all sorts of contradictory ways to look at it. So best to go a bit granular and look at some very specific examples in practice and then showcase them, and also then draw lessons from those that perhaps can be applied more widely. So going forwards for us, as I say, qualitative awards very important. Identifying dissemination beyond peer-reviewed journals as sort of ideas that can get to a wider audience, and giving credit for those who do reach out or find ways to have that interim level of impact, if you like. And then absolutely still, I think there's a value for bibliometrics of sorts, but you know, we really need, and I welcome networks and ideas on what to measure and how to measure it most effectively and transparently for the community overall.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I will just emphasize a couple of issues you mentioned, and one is the role of learned societies and scholars in regaining kind of importance in this process and role in the assessment of scholarly work. And the other is what you mentioned about the assessment of impact, and what came out of BAM IFSAM panel last week, which was also on the changing research landscape in times of impact, is that perhaps we should be looking at the process as a whole, and rather than a specific outcome, and look at how, for example, from the idea, as you were mentioning, from the research question, there can be engagement with broader issues, with issues of importance, and how that can influence actually the research process throughout, rather than singly focusing on a specific outcome and trying to measure whether it has or not an impact. And this brings me to going to the universities themselves, to our leaders who actually are managing this agenda. And I would like to use a question from the audience. Katie Mason has a wonderful question. She thanks the panel for the interesting observations. And she poses a question which is very relevant for both Erica and Tang's roles. What do you think universities should be doing to assess the impact of our research? And do you think this requires new structures, resources in our business and management schools? And I want to use this question to address both Erica and Tang and ask you, so what are you doing and how are you addressing this agenda as leaders? And Erica, we can start with you. Thank you.
Well, as I said before, I work in a business school at Universidad del Desarrollo in Chile, and I would like to give a little bit of context. I don't know if you can hear me, it's okay? Yeah?
Yes, okay. Yeah.
My university was founded around 3 decades ago by economists who were, very, very concerned about entrepreneurship and innovation in Chile. So from the very beginning, I think that it's in the conception of this organization, the importance on having impact on grand challenges. For Chile was a big issue, entrepreneurship and innovation at that time. So having said that, in our business school, we agree on that, we talk about this with our dean very frequently. And we agree and that we already have impact, a lot of impact in our society. We have a center on entrepreneurship. We work with our students on new business projects all the time. We have been involved for several years on a collaborative project. You mentioned, Gianni Manuel, about collaboration at international level, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if you know Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. This is a global project who study entrepreneurship in many different countries, and they share all the data that they collect from all the countries. We also have a global project on international elites. We are working now on, on the evolution of elites in several countries for at least 100 years. So my point here is that I think we need to repackage or like doing an inventory of what we really are doing in terms of impact and research, because we believe that we have a lot of impact already. And again, do an inventory and think, okay, this is what we already have. What are the gaps now? What things are we missing? What do we have to learn from now on? But again, we need an inventory with a different measure, with a different perspective, the perspective of impact. And the other thing that we are missing is that many things that we are doing, we don't document these things. So we are doing things, but nobody counts that. Nobody measure that. So we have to create the measures, the document, the business cases or the cases of all the things that we are doing. Having said that, and for increasing our, I would say, impact, one of the things that we did, and I mentioned this briefly when I present myself, was that we have this new initiative on sustainability. It's an interdisciplinary project at the business school where we are going to, put together all the research projects and collaborative projects and things that we are doing on sustainability at the environmental level, at the diversity level, at different levels, but that has to do with sustainability. And of course, on this project, we want and we expect to have international participants and collaborators. We also are increasing our conversations with policymakers because we agree also that we need to create new informal structures. We need to start talking with new people that we were not talking before. So for promoting these conversations with policymakers, we invite scholars from the UK. Now in the coming weeks, we will have scholars from UK, from Brazil, to present the research, but also to talk about their experiences, about how they collaborate with policymakers. So we are learning from scholars abroad that are living abroad and that are doing collaboration with policymakers. And we want to listen to them, what they have to say for us, what things we can learn from them. And the other thing that I would like to mention is that we are including new positions in our structure. We have people, for instance, that it's doing all the time. They are, exploring projects, funding projects from abroad where we can participate, that also consider impact on grand challenges, as I mentioned. So I think that this is what I wanted to share with us. And if you have questions, I am open to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erika. And now I'm going to move to Professor Tang Zhen and also ask you the same question. So how do you do it in the context of your university, and also maybe what obstacles you encounter as you push this kind of agenda towards more impact or towards more attention to grand challenges? And just before I give you the word, we are aware that there are some hands in the audience, and once we are done with this initial question, we will give you the opportunity to pose your questions. Back to you, Professor Tang Zhen.
Okay. Okay, I'll briefly talking about the assessment of in university on academic research. Okay, Houhai University belongs to the Chinese Ministry of Education. So our approach to evaluate academic achievements is basically similar to that of all public universities in China. The quality evaluation in China mainly focus on two types of academic publications. One is published academic papers, and the other is the academic monographs. For papers, the quality of the paper is generally determined by the quality of the journal. International top management journals such as FT 50, UT Dallas 24, ABA's 4-star or above, the papers published in them are still considered higher quality in China. Other English journals are generally evaluated according to SSCI and SCI ranking list. And also we have Chinese ranking list for the publication journal. They are Chinese Social Science and Citation Index, briefly called CSSCI. Yeah. In the past, only good business schools in China have their own catalog of high quality journals and blacklist of journals. Yeah, but now almost all business school, actually almost all university, have their list of high level or blacklist of journal. Yeah, only tier journal. About academic monographs, there are two ways to evaluate the monographs. One is through the level of the press. Actually, in China, we have a list of press ranking list of the press. The other is through academic awards. If monographs can apply for the Ministry of Education or the provincial government's research achievements award, the monographs will be evaluated higher level. Yeah. Actually, we know that according to evaluate according to the rank of journal is not very fair to the scholars. But actually, the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Science and Technology of China have also put forward a clear requirements that universities cannot evaluate based on publication only. That means the academic level of scholars cannot be evaluated only by looking at a few publications. And the academic level of scholars cannot be evaluated based on the journal's impact factor. Academic level of the publications, however, it's merely denial, not fair solution. Based on according to the journal or journal level or the award of monographs. But it's very difficult to make substantial changes in actual implementation because China is still in the exploratory stage in terms of the academic system. If it's not for the overall reform of international rules, China is also very, it's difficult for China to make, in-depth changes. So in my opinion, about the evaluation of the academic achievements, I think first is about the characteristics of journals or press. In generally, more publications per year, shorter review cycle, higher layout fee. There is higher accumulating money for publication. If in this situation the publication's quality is poor is poor. Okay. The second is about the form of academic evaluation. Due to the influence of various factors, several major evaluation institutions are still in the state of their own affairs. It is necessary to organize or promote in-depth changes and cooperation among them. However, the biggest difficulty lies in the lack of motivation for their cooperation. Also, it should maximize the positive role of peer review to jointly study to create a more perfect, reasonable, and operable peer review mechanism, just like the meeting, just like this meeting, right? The last aspect is about the content of research. Here, I would like to borrow a phrase from our President Xi Jinping. He said, scientists and scholars should write their papers on the land of the motherland. I think this statement is say that the true for scholars from all countries. That means scholars should find real problems based on in-depth understanding of management practice, discover the truth with scientific and rigorous logical methods, and construct innovation theories to guide and improve management practice. For our school, High University is it's an industrial university because our main discipline is the water scientists. It's based on the social demand of our country or of the world. So I think we should think about how we think about the path that let our business administration knowledge move to practice. How to do this in how to make this in how to say how to make it in sorry it's a block in my brain. Okay, okay, I changed my set. Okay, I think knowledge as a public resource should be shared equally by both you know, university and the real world. It's so our assessment of their academic achievement should benefit for this outcome. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And what I guess I take from both Erica and Tang's presentations is, on the one hand, universities and business schools are already doing a lot that needs to be articulated and needs to be channeled in terms of recognizing and appreciating that work. And on the other hand, I also take what for IFSAM has been very important, to appreciate the local and regional and contextual specificity of research, and to give voice to researchers from these contexts to bring relevance for the particular contexts in which they develop their research and careers. I will pass the word to, yeah.
Sylvia, can I add something after what Tang explained? I think that it's important, at least for me, to remark that in a private university like mine, I think that change is much easier than when you are part of a public institution. So for us, it's basically, as I said, it has to be with our DNA, right? That we are very involved in entrepreneurship and innovation. So we are very concerned about impact. But on top of that, we don't basically have to respond to a higher institution, right? We have much more freedom to adapt to these new demands of the society. Thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you. And I will pass now the word to Pedro, because we have a question from the audience. And Pedro, if you can facilitate, Jesus has been very patient with us and had the hand for quite a while.
So we are going to continue the dialogue, but move towards the Q&A part of our conversation, right? And Jesus has been, as Silvia said, very patient and raised his hand, and we just invited him to the opportunity to pose the question. So if you're there, Jesus, you can just, speak your question to our panelists.
Maybe we have to unmute Pedro.
Yeah. In principle, he should be able to unmute now. Can you hear us, Jesus?
If it's not possible for you to speak up the question, maybe you can post it in the Q&A section, and we will immediately transfer it to all the panelists. I think we are asking you to unmute, but I don't know, for whatever reason that is not working. So if you can post your question in the Q&A, and if you're unable to join us in this audience, we will be delighted to address the question. This is also to invite all of you participants with questions or comments you may have to the panelists, but also comments and observations from your own kind of approach to research. We have promoted actually Jesus to panelist. We will try once again. Yeah, you are promoted to panelist, Jesus. We don't know why it is actually not functioning, but but please do post your question in the Q&A panel, and we will address it. Thanks a lot. So maybe to continue a little bit with the conversation as we are waiting for Jesus to type the question and for others to kind of join the conversation. You all mentioned the need for collaboration across, the need for different organizations, different institutions to come together. How do you think, or what do you think a good place for this dialogue to happen? Or what forum that could take? And I open it to whoever has a suggestion.
Sylvia, what do you mean by you know, the place or where have to happen? Because I think that we already have collaboration. Researchers, we are experts on collaboration. We publish papers with co-authors all the time. So maybe universities have to take advantage of this a little bit more. We are just doing this for writing papers, but we can do the same thing for other outputs, to create other type of outputs. We could have, for instance, initiatives, collective initiatives to solve problems like the access of women to top positions in companies, which is a huge problem. We have, at least here in Chile, we have very well-educated women with very professional, and for them it's very difficult to get access to top positions in companies. So how we can help women to solve this, and how we can collaborate at a transnational level to solve that. But again, we don't have maybe now the time and the incentives to do that. Because now we have incentives, as Andrew and Jean-Manuel mentioned, and also Tang, to publish papers. But I don't have in my work plan, annual work plan, a project like this.
I mean, yeah, I just add, I mean, I think there is a lot of literature, dare I say, on sort of failures of bibliometrics and research. The problem is, I often think there's more critique than substantive suggestions of alternatives. You know, and I mean, if some, you know, we at the FT and others, I think, can play a role. You know, I'm quite happy to convene a sort of discussion on these processes. And I've already kind of, as I said at the start, and I've said elsewhere, you know, I think some work on common standards to kind of motivate an easy way to share openly, consistently, unambiguously, comprehensively academic output would be very useful. But I think it needs to bring together both the, as it were, the practitioners who are involved in the hands-on work of collecting the sort of bibliometric or compiling the bibliometric data, and the sort of academic leadership level who sees presumably some value in measuring research impact, but it is also willing to collaborate and share ideas on how it could be most effectively put into one place and what new metrics could be tested out. And I'm certainly very, you know, interested and happy to get involved or to help convene something like that.
Yeah, I just want to give an example. I would take again the issue of diversity at the top levels, right? We already know, after this research around the world, that those countries that have quotas have been more effective on the access, on giving access to women to those positions. But in many countries, we don't have quotas, and they are highly resist. So impact means that by using the research and the experiences in other countries, we can create, for instance, here, practices like quotas that help women to have access, right? And this is impact of research. And we need maybe global projects to do things like that. I don't know if, yeah?
And I think, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think, that goes back to what we were discussing earlier, and the fact that, you know, there are so many different aspects to social impact, for example, that, you know, there could be all sorts of different ways you can slice and dice this and have focus. I mean, socioeconomic background, for example, first generation to university, as you say, gender and other forms of diversity in faculty appointments, in students, in academic research, and so on. But thinking more on the data collection side initially, just kind of what we could measure in university activities and the academic output from universities would be a good starting point. You know, let's see how we could work jointly to, one, identify some metrics that have some value, and two, find some simple systems that would allow, you know, everybody to minimize the effort and maximize the result. And I haven't, at least the discussions I've been involved with, I haven't found that sort of forum yet. As I say, because I think people are often working in their own silos, and as you say, they're not necessarily incentivized to liaise and coordinate around these things.
Great. And Jean Emmanuel, you have tried also to contribute to that point, yeah?
Yes, exactly. So your question is about collaboration. I think the initiative we push currently is exactly about that, is to bring together a large number of organizations to work on solutions. As Andrew was mentioning, could be one example of topic to be addressed, and there are many others. And I think, well, having a few organizations, few institutions, few universities working together is not sufficient. I think we need to have a critical mass. We need to have a broad spectrum and number of organizations to work on issues. Why do I say this? Because I think we have a situation where research assessment, and we see this in Europe, there is a study published by the European University Association that shows that still today, number one comes journal impact factor in the assessment of the staff in universities. If we want to move away from these practices, the problem is that the universities, they are looking very much closely at their rankings in these large international rankings like those published by THE or the Shanghai ranking and others. They look at this very closely. And for them, moving away from metrics like GIF and publishing in prestigious journal represents a risk for them. A risk when it comes to recruiting staff, to attracting the best students, etc. And in order to facilitate changes, these changes, and moving away from inappropriate practices, we need to have a quite important critical mass number of stakeholders willing to change. Otherwise, I'm afraid that change will be very difficult. So I would say collaboration at stakeholder level as large as possible. But I think even this is not sufficient. We need also to use the existing fora like UNESCO, like G7, like OECD, etc. And there are currently actions under G7 and UNESCO to discuss research assessments, because and I would like to react to one comment made by Andrew earlier. You were focusing your attention to the data, to the infrastructures. I fully agree with you. They are critical. Developing persistent identifiers and developing this broadly is a preliminary step necessary if we want to then start measuring impacts. And for this, we need to have some agreements that go beyond just one country, and we need to have discussions at a higher level on the infrastructures and the data across continents even, and we need to use fora for that. These are my reactions.
This is great. Thank you so much for this very interesting conversation. I just want to reiterate to all the participants that we're happy to get your questions. But in the meantime, we talked about collaboration, right? And we know that there is an interest, especially in the management field, on discussions about impact and so on. And I was wondering, what is it going to look like, right? The implication of this impact agenda, so to speak, the future of management research, focus in particular for early career scholars and junior people, right? We were just talking about the challenge that universities face because, of course, the way in which they assess is related to the rankings and who they attract, but also to how the profession endures and people are brought into and what kind of norms exist. So I think in general, my question is how we can envision the impact of these discussions on impact for the newcomers into the profession, so to speak. And sorry, I didn't direct the question, but anyone that feels that would like to respond first, please jump in.
Okay, I just have to say that we have a PhD program at the business school, and for our students, we start asking them more on impact. I would say that they have to choose topics where they can have an impact on society, basically. And the research has to be connected with real cases. They are involved with companies more and more. This is how I think we are asking our students to be much more connected with reality. That maybe when I did my PhD, at that time, I remember that was important to have a good database and run regressions and analyze results. It's fine, they do that. We prepare them from methodologies, good, a strong methodology approach, but at the same time, much more in contact with organizations.
Thank you. And Jean Emmanuel, you also wanted to add to that point?
Yeah, I wanted to react by saying that, in my view, this puts, in particular, early career researchers in a quite difficult position, actually. And why? Because in the conversations we have, we see that early career researchers, they are calling for a more collaborative environment, a more open environment, practicing open science, having the possibility to engage with society. I think there are, maybe there are variations between disciplines, but they are very modern in the approach they want to have to research. But at the same time, if the system is locked in a situation where what is evaluated, what is rewarded is number of publications in highly prestigious journals, then they are put in a very difficult situation. Because, well, hopefully they can get a position, but then they have young students with them. And what do they recommend to their young students? To play the game and try to publish in science, nature, etc., or to focus on the impact of their activities and in particular the societal impact, which requires different measures to be fully appreciated. So I think young researchers, they are in a difficult situation, and we absolutely need to have a movement that leads to changes to the way research assessment is done. Otherwise, this tension will keep growing and will render the research system not so attractive, at least in certain regions of the globe.
Thanks a lot. And it certainly requires thinking about the new generations and probably new ways of approaching PhD education, postdoctoral training, and the like. I will pick on one question from the audience that kind of relates to our conversation on a more elaborate process, reading deeply rather than counting, looking into the content in depth rather than kind of using some proxy metrics. The question that is asked is, where would resources for that come from, and how would we find the time and resources needed actually to unfold what is a much more complex, much more elaborate process of assessing both at recruitment, but also in our overall assessment? Any thoughts on that? More than welcome.
Well, I mean, it comes back to what we were discussing earlier, doesn't it, about a sort of lowest common denominator, efficient way to share resources, prioritize what matters, develop common standards. So, I mean, someone was talking to me about, I can't remember the name of it now, a sort of academic analytics, perhaps, that costs a huge amount of money, which some schools have invested in. It seems to me it wouldn't take a huge amount of clever coding time to develop something that's entirely free or very cheap if there are those identified identifiers that are available out there to help with the filtering in the process. You might know about this thing called Open Alex, for example, which is a sort of replacement for Microsoft Academic. And I think that's an interesting model, trying to bring together some of these different sources in peer-reviewed and grey literature, for instance, but all of them rely on common identifiers. So that's on that side. Of course, any process will involve resources, and there needs to be some degree of recognition, if not direct incentives, for people to allocate time to all these different priorities. I mean, if that came up partly in the context of what I was saying earlier about, individual tenure decisions, I mean, I have to say, if senior faculty is not investing a significant amount in really thinking through who they should be appointed to tenure, they really shouldn't be in those positions. I mean, that to me is so existential to their role. And, you're making a relatively few number of tenure decisions at any one time. And frankly, it's so important to the future of the academic institution that it clearly merits a carving out of time and resource and so on. But obviously, particularly for kind of the growing amount of administrative requirements and reporting and pressures, particularly on junior faculty that one hears more and more in different countries, I mean, there needs to be a real think about priorities and rewards and incentives for different forms of activity. As I said earlier, I think it has to be taken seriously.
Yeah, Jean Emmanuel.
Yeah, to react to what Andrew just said and to fully support his point of a need to properly reward peer review as one of the several tasks that researchers are doing. But I think it probably goes beyond that. We need to probably focus more on more meaningful assessments, maybe fewer assessments, and thinking about a good equilibrium between project-based funding and recurrent funding, which is another key parameter, I think, in the equation. And also potentially having the possibility to reuse certain assessments whenever this is feasible. And also, when it comes to the peer review, it is, sorry, I'm losing the thread of my thinking. There was another parameter. Yes, so fewer assessments. Yeah, sorry, I missed the point. It may come back and I may intervene yet later, sorry.
Absolutely. So we are driving into the last 4 minutes of our panel, and it has been a very energizing and very much thought-provoking discussion, and there has been a lot of convergence. So I want to ask, are there any unintended consequences or potential dangers with this big passion for impact? Is there somewhere in the ranks a cautionary note to be made as we so eagerly embrace a whole new way that will redefine how we do research, but also how we assess and bring our colleagues forward and our projects forward? Any thoughts on that? What to be aware of as we embark on that journey wholeheartedly? Yeah, Jean Emmanuel?
Maybe I jump in.
Please.
Maybe two first things that come to my mind. The first potential unintended consequence is that we replace certain measures that are not fully appropriate by others that are not more appropriate. So we need to be very careful about having a diversity of measures and considering all the diverse facets of impact. First thing, diverse in many things. So short-term, medium-term, long-term, societal, economic, scientific, etc. First thing. So we need, I think, to go through towards diversity in our thinking. And the second potential in unintended consequence when it comes to impact is that it may put at a risk certain forms of research. So we should not forget fundamental research that has very different type of impact. It's more about creating knowledge, and this should not be weakened because we need this thrive for knowledge that sometimes has impacts difficult to measure on the very long term. So this is another potential consequence we need to be we're very conscious and careful about, in my view.
Thank you so much. Yeah, any other thoughts, Erica?
I agree with Jean Manuel that I think that one of the risks of these changes is that we are going to put too much emphasis on the short term, and maybe we will lose the long-term impact of some type of research. Yeah.
Bold and brave ideas that do not have immediate kind of applicability, but maybe a next new frontier that we have not yet envisioned, right? Yeah, any other thoughts from the remainder of the panelists?
Well, I agree with all that on the importance of fundamental as well as more applied research. And as I said at the start, not trying to, dictate or limit at the start. But I do think there's a sort of ecosystem that can be encouraged to try to engage with, the practitioner community at the time of conceptualization of research, and to think through if there's something meaningful that comes out, how it could then be taken up in practice. But I think, as I say, I mean, these days in the big data world, we must be careful of being too prescriptive and sort of, as I say, try to develop standards that allow open access, and then different players can themselves, in a much more friction-free way, analyze things that are relevant for them and trends and practices that emerge over time. And I'm certainly very happy to, if there are others here, to sort of, roll up our sleeves a bit and think about what would be useful to measure and how to measure it, and find ways to try and push that forward.
Well, it's 5 p.m. sharp. I want to thank our wonderful panelists for generously embracing the topic, which has been a topic of concern of the General Assembly of IFSAM, of caring and sharing your specific approaches and your bigger dreams for our field and for the way in which it can become a better place for research and researchers. On behalf of IFSAM, I want to say that we are eager to continue the conversation, and we will definitely take you up on your willingness to dream up together the next new opportunity or frontier. Big thanks to all of you. Big thanks to our audience, which was with us on this panel. And please do reach out with suggestions which IFSAM can take forward as we develop our ideas on the soft policy of research. Thank you so much. I close the session. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Thank you.
yeah,
Bye.
learn much tonight. Thank you, everyone.